the burden of having strategic clarity on managers is going to be much, much higher because there's going to be so much more work to coordinate. At the end of the day, the thinking work that the humans do to figure out what it is to build, it's like a 10x burden on judgment for the leadership part of the organization to get it right.
Hello and welcome everyone. I'm Sam Chappell and this is Not a Threat. This show explores how to prepare for an AI-first future. Through conversations with leaders at the forefront of AI, we examine how organizations and individuals can harness its potential and thrive in an AI-first world. You can find notes from this discussion, along with other episodes, frameworks, and more at notathreat.ai. My guest today is Supriya Gupta, the founder and CEO of an AI advisory studio. Supriya previously led AI-driven product innovation at companies like Credit Karma, Facebook, and IBM. Today, she works with business leaders to help them harness AI for both efficiency and invention. Her first product, a personal executive ghostwriter called The Agency, is emerging from stealth this month, and we discuss how it enables executives to increase their contributions to thought leadership content. Supriya also shares a practical framework for building context-aware products, explains why the cost of creation is collapsing, and makes the case for taste, not just technical sophistication, as the new competitive edge. Supriya's thinking is sharp, actionable, and grounded in real-world experimentation. So, please enjoy my conversation with Supriya Gupta. How will AI alter the definition of a great product?
When I left corporate America several months ago, it was an interesting transition to look into how is the world going to evolve. And it was actually a big driving factor for me leaving corporate America because I wanted to be unshackled and unconstrained from my ability to explore. So what did I do? I tried to start anywhere between 1 and 5 businesses, depending on how you count it. and I didn't just read about Gen AI. I decided to just get out there and use it. I needed headshots, so I went to Foul.ai and I figured out how to create headshots. I used Bolt and Cursor and even tried Claude to figure out how I can spin up a landing page. And it was actually really amazing. Things that would take weeks get done in minutes. I had a friend of mine come over one day and she just started talking to me about how she wants to pitch me some apps she wants to build and she's going to have a big market. She just starts talking to me and I'm like, wait a second, hold on. And I turned on the microphone on my phone. I was like, okay, now talk. And so I captured her voice, took that, transformed it into a PRD in Claude, popped that into Lovable, and in about 10 minutes, we had a working prototype for the app that she was pitching me. So I think to answer your question, these are all the micro moments that helped me realize that the cost of creation is really asymptoting collapsing. And really the hard part now isn't the building per se. A lot of it hinges on deciding what to build and then also building in very different types of technical moats like context, more on personalization and data, because the great products of today that are useful and beautiful, now what really matters is that they need to be specific and context aware because the users expect a much, much higher level of quality and precision on their use cases and really honing in on solving that very specific real problem that they have in that moment. So creation, the cost of building is going down. The burden of judgment is skyrocketing.
Could you maybe just dive a little deeper on that point around context and how that differs from the products that were built even 3-4 years ago?
Yeah, absolutely. So when people say, oh, you want to build a context-aware app, you want something that takes in an input and adapts the product to it, that's one type of context. Another type of context could be shifting the copy because I know you're in one audience segment versus another, delivering content in a way from picking through an inventory and presenting the right piece of content to you that I think is going to convert the best with you. These are all contextual applications of, in the past, predictive AI, which ultimately looks at audiences and tries to figure out from each one of those audiences which buckets you're in and what to show you as a result. I think that the change now in terms of the not only the capability but the expectation of context is actually that I want that thing personalized exactly to me. And that is the expectation. You use ChatGPT, it's talking to you. It's not talking to someone else. And it can take in exactly what you said, not an approximation of what you said mapped to some other data set, but it can take exactly what you said and react to it. And it can play back exact information based on exactly who you are and it very specifically and exactly what you input. So that I think that's actually like a massive tectonic shift. Just to bring it to a very specific example, I think I have personally been on at least 3, I can count off the top of my head, if not more, but at least 3 dynamic creative optimization teams throughout my career working in AI in various like ads and marketing and record systems. All of them had failed, or if they didn't fail, they were faking it. Why? Because they couldn't do this. Now you can actually do it, which is like actually crazy. Like the one-to-one personalizations actually arrived.
Is there any downside to that from a consumer point of view? You put a different hat on and it sounds quite dystopian, right? You hear those examples of people being charged different amounts on an app for the same product. Is there a world where there's almost a rebellion against this kind of context being brought into a product?
I think it all hinges on you actually using AI in the place where it's going to generate value for the end user. Like, one of the things that was really interesting, like all throughout my career, especially in the last few years, even talking to some of the clients I help today at a couple of my different companies, shouldn't necessarily apply AI because it doesn't always belong everywhere. So it really needs to belong in places where it's going to add some value, and then people don't mind. People mind when you put it in places where it's not adding value, and that's usually when you get the whole this feels really creepy, and I don't want this here. And I think that the people who do this wrong are going to be the ones who end up with that blowback of this isn't adding value. This is you just trying to sell your product in weird ways or push something down my throat that I don't want. Or you're forcing me to have a conversation so you can collect data, but you're not using that data to help me. So why did you just collect that data? And I've actually seen some of these, I'll just call it dark in air quotes patterns. I don't know if it's exact dark patterns, but these thinly veiled product experiences that are supposed to be helpful to the consumer that are actually really just more like contextual ad engines. Working in AI, you run into this constantly, especially in consumer, because you make money off of ads. So you end up seeing a lot of this type of behavior. And I think it's that kind of behavior that leads you down that path of distrust. And that's what erodes. And so I guess what I would say to that is that the more companies end up succumbing to those breaking their core principles and guiding principles around value first, those are the companies who are going to really struggle. And I think that's where the anti-AI is going to show up. As far as people who are trying to do it right and people on the fringes not liking that AI exists, like the fact that ChatGPT exists, those people will always be there. There will always be the skeptics and the laggards in any sort of new technology. But I think that at this point, given the amount of potential it has and the rate of adoption, it does feel like in general, on a whole, society is more on the camp of it provides value to me, so I don't mind.
Yeah, definitely the feeling seems to have shifted a little in the last couple of years as people have gotten more used to it. And yeah, maybe to your point around where and when it's used, you will learn very quickly, right? People are quite vocal. The feedback loops are in place with social media and stuff to let you know when maybe you've crossed the line. Previously, you've emphasized the importance of balancing kind of innovation with safety. How do you think about implementing AI responsibly and approaching the mitigation of risk while still trying to push forward with innovation and push the boundaries possible?
I think there's a few different tenets I've followed that that help. But there's never like 100% risk-free AI in a way because it's all probabilistics. There's always a chance for errors on the margin, and it's a question of how you deal with them. One is try to prevent the errors in the first place and be smart about that. The other one is just be realistic that there might be. And if there are, how do you deal with it? So for the former, it's really about thinking about what are all the bad outcomes? Do the New York Times test. What's the headline you're scared of the most? If you're in a regulated space, there are rules you have to follow and things that are no-nos in your industries. We dealt with this all the time at various companies that I've been at. And the way that we would deal with this is really just thinking about what is deterministic and needs to be deterministic versus what needs to be probabilistic, what can be model-driven. For instance, I was actually just having this conversation with a client last week. It's just like, hey, I have this problem where I want to create this interface for my investors to go and take a look at this whole data set. We work in finance, and so the financial data needs to be solid, like it can't hallucinate. But then I want to contextualize it. So what are they doing? They're actually split the two pieces and they put a bunch of deterministic data in one camp. And so if you ask a question that hits that database and it's completely deterministic, and if you ask something more fuzzy that doesn't require financial data, you get to go to this other like more graceful generative AI solution. I share that example as you could also do it wrong. So now this is just a broken experience because now you're not getting any of the benefit of AI. You have no contextualization on the data. The problem is, and that's what she came to me with, which is this doesn't really work for me. 90% of my investor questions are actually the combination of the two. So what do I do? And I think that you can just design around these things. So like the first thing is just like ensuring that that your probabilistic models, like your LLMs or whatever they may be, have access to your deterministic data and that they always honor it. You can have agents or other things checking for these things and checking for hallucinations or errors to prevent them from happening and being served to the end user. And then ultimately, you need quality checks, right? Logs, monitoring, and feedback to ensure that. And then at the end of the day, if you are going to use LLMs, there needs to be enough disclaimers and some level of tolerance of an error here. That's just the reality of it. But that shouldn't mean that you shouldn't build the product or build the product in such a weird way that it doesn't actually provide value. So that's the way that I think about it. And it very much it depends because it depends on which industry you're in and what you can tolerate risk on. But I do think that the most under-leveraged tool has been not just the like monitoring piece, but really just like being smart about deterministic data sets and just using those in smart ways.
Let me just confirm, when you're building these things out, it's not just a simple chatbot that's querying different data sets, or it's maybe a system of tools and AIs and agents and assistants that are working together to solve these problems.
Yes, exactly. And so you can use your deterministic systems to grab the data sets that you need, and you can use tools to have those things retrieved in the right ways. You could use AI to extract the context that is needed for the LLM to provide the answer. These things are all possible. It's just just mix them up. It's okay. Because like it's all software. Mm-hmm. They can all talk to each other. There's no rule against that. It's just a silly thing to say, but it's like more often than not, I almost feel like we've almost forgotten the fact that we used to build software a little bit differently earlier, and like it's okay to mix methods and use like the Gen AI specifically in the places where it actually shines and provides value. There's no need to add it in places where it's going to add unnecessary risk.
You talked a bit about your experimentation with Lovable and Bolt and Cursor. To a Luddite who doesn't understand how to code, what is the difference between these tools and what we had 5 years ago? Oh, I've certainly learned a lot. I can probably fill your podcast fully on those lessons. But I'd say that if you look 5 years ago, maybe the simplest example is to compare it to something like Squarespace, right? So the way that you would build websites, if you didn't know how to code, you'd use a CMS. And there's a WYSIWYG UI, there's templates, and you're able to build your way into a website. You can provide
custom copy, custom images, your own color palette. There's certain things you can tailor, but you can't, it's still following templates, it's still following very specific pieces. Now, if you wanted to get more fancy, you could go into the code and try to change it. But if you don't know how to code, you're probably hiring somebody to build your website. And I'm just talking a landing page, so not even getting as fancy as what I ended up building in 10 minutes, but just a landing page. And landing pages can cost you, I don't know, $10,000, $20,000, depending on who you're hiring. Could be more. They get really expensive really fast, and that's why I'm sure Squarespace is making a killing off of this. But yeah, it's actually either really expensive or really frustrating. Actually, I first started off actually building my first landing page in Squarespace before I decided to go try to vibe code one. Oh, vibe code is the new word for coding using LLMs, which is what Bolt, Cursor, and Lovable all let you do. And even Squarespace was extremely frustrating. It took me many hours and many days to get my first version of my website up. Now, with these new tools, you can build an app and prototype an app pretty fast. So you're able to actually just use natural language and tell it what you want. So one of my favorite demos is opening up Bolt and you just type in something like, hey, I would like to build an app that is basically Airbnb but for pools. And then it'll just create an app that's Airbnb for pools. It'll have your listings, a search by zip code, and it'll come up with all sorts of things. And I don't even have to tell it, hey, I want this feature, I want this feature, I want this feature. You can use your natural language, intuit and understand, like, these are reasonably the feature set that you'd likely want, and fill in the gaps where you may not even have told it what you need. And I think those are the things that are like very different with the LLMs, is that you're able to have it use its own corpus of information because it's trained on the entirety of the internet, and use that information to fill in the gaps for the information that you didn't give it explicitly. And I think that's a little bit of its superpower, of its ability to move really fast.
So could you tell me a little bit about the products you're building? What problem are you trying to solve?
Yeah, maybe I'll tell you a little bit the anecdote of how I got to where earlier this year and ended up just grabbing coffee and talking to quite a few different entrepreneurs and founders in my network here in San Francisco. And I was curious and I asked him, like, hey, what are some of the pain points and things that you feel like AI should have solved by now and just hasn't really solved? And I got a lot of different pieces of feedback and tidbits that people had on their wish list. But the one piece of feedback and idea that kept coming back to me was just the need to have presence digitally as a business leader. Founders are kind of like the face of their business. A lot of these executives also need that presence to pull in business, independent consultants, fractional executives, etc. They all need to carry visibility in a digital context. And that's extremely not trivial to do, especially on a regular basis. These are people who are constantly out there doing, and because they're so busy doing, they don't have time to talk. But if you don't talk, you don't get the business. And so that was the business opportunity that I saw. But what didn't make sense to me was, why is this not a solved problem? I really thought that AI should have been a great tool for this, because it's literally a large language model is what LLM stands for. Like, language is in the word. It should have solved a writing problem. But the reality is that the LLMs are trained on the average of the internet. And what you actually need, going full circle to the beginning of our conversation, what you actually need is context. The context, who you are, how you think, what do you think about, what are your opinions, what's your market, who are your customers, what does your brand stand for, who are you trying to attract, what are you trying to solve for them? And all of those things are what great marketers or marketing professionals, they're constantly thinking about all these variables when they craft any piece of content for any brand or any sort of communication. So how do you do that on like a personalized basis? So I took this as a challenge to figure out, blending both predictive and generative AI, to figure out if it is possible to use AI to accelerate the bridge from these really brilliant insights that people have throughout their day at different meetings, different conversations, and bridge that with being able to amplify those brilliant moments, those brilliant insights with basically with all that context so that they could actually broadcast those insights into the world and increase their digital presence, their visibility, and thereby their relevance to their audience and staying top of mind. So that was the big business opportunity that I saw. Fast forward to now, I started off with a few smaller prototypes, and the system itself has evolved quite a bit over the last few months. So we're actually piloting with a few customers, which is really exciting to see it come to life. But it's really about marrying the power of generative AI and its superpower of language, personalized context, to make this really big impact in the modernized executive influence space.
So without giving away too much of your secret sauce, could you maybe just give a quick rundown on what's the workflow from insight output? What do I as a user have to do? And then maybe what's going on a little under the hood.
So for a user, my goal is to actually make it as dead simple as possible. In fact, it's a funny conundrum as a founder or as any entrepreneur, is when you make it really simple for an end user, to not realize how much heavy lifting might be happening underneath the hood. But it is theoretically possible for an end user to onboard in under a minute with as little as a website and a link to your LinkedIn page. And then we use all of that information and understanding about you and your digital footprint to date to basically understand your voice, your perspectives, and your market. And we combine those things as effectively what I've been calling an insights engine, which is the beating heart of the whole system. And then from there, once you've spent your full 1 minute onboarding, potentially, or less, depending on how fast you type, you can start creating content. And the content intake can take as something as simple as you typing, or you upload, a transcript from a meeting or a podcast that you had with a great podcaster like Sam on Not a Threat. So you can take any assets that you have and you can transform them into content. But most of my clients actually that are using this product, they actually just step themselves on their phone, like using the native microphone on your phone, that feature, and it'll just record and they send it to me. Sometimes they're like half-baked phrases, not full sentences, and they flub a little bit here and there. But the core message is there. And I actually encourage people to use voice for that reason, because it grabs the raw insight and the raw thinking, because that's the unique piece that humans had. Like, you had that real life moment, that aha moment, that interesting thing that happened. And so being able to capture that right away with all of the rough edges that might come from just talking freely versus trying to polish it, that actually ends up creating the most interesting content because it's really real and really personal. And so that's how it works. So onboard for a minute, talk for a few minutes, press a button, tell me what kind of post you want, and voila. You've got something that you can put on the internet that people are pretty proud of.
Yeah, the voice functionality on ChatGPT, although I don't like talking to it, I like recording into it. And my wife makes fun of me because I'm talking to ChatGPT again. But it is so much more natural, right? We're talking about natural language. It feels so much more natural than typing. I feel like when I'm typing, firstly, it's slower than my brain, and I'm self-editing as I'm going. And half the time, if I'm typing something out, I lose track and forget where I am. I really want them to figure out the chat functionality. I want to be able to talk to it, but I get cut off all the time. And it is so frustrating trying to have a conversation with the AI. We're not there yet, which is probably good for my marriage.
Oh, I'm sure it's coming, though.
Yeah, it sounds amazing. The flow is super simple. And you said there's a lot going on under the hood. And maybe it's almost hard for people to appreciate when that's happening. That's the goal, is it's so simple you don't even necessarily realize what's happening there. If everyone's using tools like this, does that mean that thought leadership is becoming more democratic? Or do you think there's a risk that it becomes more homogeneous? We're getting flooded with AI content. What's the potential downside of the content generation that your clients will be putting out there?
So I think that the opportunity compared to this type of product not existing in the world is actually providing much higher quality content, i.e. democratizing access to actually building real thought leadership at scale to more people, particularly the people that are very busy. So I was very intentional about it being a dead simple UX because it's the people who are the busiest that have the most interesting things to say that really needed to be like a 2-minute process and not several hours of their work week. And so that's what it's designed for. And going back to the earlier note on the personalization context, like that's how you get good, insightful content out there. And so the people who use it in the way that it's intended will hopefully improve the quality of content that's out there versus if you compare, I don't know, what's generally out there today. I can't tell you the number of people, as a little side note, I can't tell you the number of people who have said, hey, Supriya, this sounds really great. Can you actually have a different variant of the agency where I don't have to think at all? Can you just smash together the internet and then come up with something and then make it sound like me so I can post it? And I won't name names, but there have been more than one person coming to me ask me to do that. And the answer is no, that's not what this is for. The intention is to bring sparks of insight that humans have into the world. And I think that's how you keep the bar high. There's always a risk with AI that it's garbage in and garbage out. But the hope is that if you take a personalized approach, it won't be that way. Versus others who can take not so contextual approach, i.e. using ChatGPT or doing what I just described, because people are certainly doing that and they just want faster workflows. And there are a lot of other content creation tools out there aside from ChatGPT or Claude that'll help you do those things at scale. My hope is that something like this encourages people to speak who don't have time to, who have really great insights, and get them out into the world because it's to their benefit because they actually gain from a business standpoint. And that's what creates that sort of shared incentives on both sides.
Mm-hmm. There is an expectation when you're trying to hire employees that you have some kind of digital footprint. And I know for one, I've definitely struggled with that of like, how do I get something out there that's authentic and doesn't sound like it's just written by ChatGPT? I mean, there's so much out there that is just slop, right? And you can tell it from a mile off. And how do you raise the bar? What are you adding to the system? And that's really an interesting insight, right? Like you say, there are all these people that are not adding into the bucket right now that are actually the people you want to hear from.
Exactly. So how do you crack that? Or do you crack the collective genius and wisdom of humanity? And a lot of those insights are locked in the heads of people who are just too darn busy doing stuff and making a difference in the world.
You've built teams throughout your career. And I know you've highlighted on a number of occasions the importance of having a diverse product team, particularly when it comes to deploying AI. How has that diversity in backgrounds and perspectives and experiences contributed to success in the past? And I guess when you're thinking about building teams, how do you make sure that it remains a core part of your talent strategy?
Yeah, I think diverse teams are incredibly critical because, especially when you're in AI, because basically like I don't know if you've ever heard the phrase or the catchphrase, you are the algorithm. It's the people who are building, like it's your thoughts, your perspective. You're the ones writing the specs. It's like that's what's gonna make it into the product. And if you don't have a diverse team that's seen different walks of life and gone through different experiences, those experiences won't make it into the product. And particularly when you're building AI products, particularly AI products that are intended for a wide audience, which is, I used to work at Credit Karma and Facebook and other really wide, large organizations that basically serve all of society. You have to represent all of the society in that product, or all of society is not going to use the product. Just give you a quick example. Like, I work with a lot of people who are immigrants actually to this country. So they're not from the United States. And when it comes to personal finance, you go through just very different experiences. And so those experiences are turned into product ideas, turned into better features. And so those are some quick examples. One not obvious one when it comes to Gen AI that I've experienced is actually around empathy. So when you interact with AI, one of the interesting things about interacting with AI is actually being really good at empathy translates quite directly to being really good at prompting, which might sound funny, but if you think about prompting, it's like being a manager, but like managing the AI. You have to think ahead. Oh, what's it going to not understand? What was not clear about what I said? What is it going to think erroneously? How do I make sure that I tell it exactly what it needs to do? And so the people who are really good at empathy tend to be really good at prompting. And it's just something that we just saw over and over again over the last few years. It's a funny thing. And I would say that, like, very much a bell curve statement, and not to single anyone out, but like, it's people who have some sort of marginalized experience, whether you're like gender or race or whatever it may be, you're immigrant, these, that, and almost everyone has one of these things going on. But if you've experienced those things, you experience the note of, I have to think ahead and understand, how is the room going to interpret what I say? Or you go through those motions. And those are those human moments where many of us learn as humans to develop empathy, because you have to like understand how other people are going to perceive you. And building those muscles was this like very interesting additional side effect, aside from all the conventional, hey, you should have a diverse team and diversity of thought really matters. This third piece of empathy was like actually the really surprising and interesting superpower that our team had as we were building Gen AI tools in the past, and also my current team that's also quite diverse.
How do you develop that skill of empathy then, if it's something that's so crucial to using AI well? How could an individual, a team, a company ensure that skill is crafted and honed?
I think that there's an opportunity that I've thought about around how, as I was seeing this pattern unfold, this is an opportunity that I've thought about, which is really, when you think about leadership training, a lot of it is building empathy. I wonder if there is a different version of that as a cottage industry that emerges at some point, where it's just teaching everybody the same skills that you would teach leaders, but adapted to the context of dealing with AI. Because so many of the principles are the same, or many of the principles are the same. And so how can you like potentially train through that lens? I'll give you like a counterpoint of what I've heard, where people have said things like, oh, you should train people, consider running a workshop, Supriya, on prompt engineering. And I was like, sure, I can do that. But a lot of the way I talk to AI personally is very like instinctive. And I talk to them like they're on my team. And I've been a manager for many years, so it all comes naturally to me. And so I could do that, but I don't really follow the rules, quite frankly, that people publish on the internet about how to prompt. And I get really good results regardless, just because I think I understand more of the underpinnings of how AI works as it relates to providing instruction. And so I think that's like an interesting provocation to think about, is like that. And I say, other than that, it's honestly just like trying, figuring out when it doesn't work really well, and trying to reverse engineer what you did wrong and then learning from that. So I think the formal route could be more like a riff on leadership training, and a very informal route that everyone can do is honestly just try to use AI for random things. Do it more than you normally would, especially if you're bad. Just keep trying and see where you're like not effective and try to figure out how to be more effective and be active about that feedback loop with yourself. And that's another way to really train yourself. And the latter is what I've been advising a lot of my clients and peers as well who've been asking me about it.
As AI transforms workflows and decision-making processes and businesses are going through this transformation, how can leaders maintain strong team dynamics and ensure that they're enhancing collaboration rather than maybe encouraging a dependence on technology? And maybe you talked a little there about the skills of being a good leader, make you good with AI. What does a good leader look like in an AI-powered organization?
It's a great question. I think what's going to end up happening is each IC who's an individual contributor, if you're doing the AI game, the IC of tomorrow is going to be 10x more productive than the IC of today. And so I think that's like a very interesting provocation to think about as a leader, because maybe you had a team of 10 product managers, but now you can have a team of 1 that can do 10x the work. I don't think it's really going to scale exactly like that because people have specialized skill sets, but that I even think that'll evolve over time too. I think the burden of having strategic clarity on managers is going to be much, much higher because there's going to be so much more work to coordinate. At the end of the day, like the thinking work that the humans do to figure out what it is to build, going back to the very beginning of our conversation about how critical judgment is, I think it's like a 10x burden on judgment for the leadership part of the organization to get it right. And so I think the leaders of tomorrow are going to just need to flex those strategic skills in terms of judgment, clarity, where they want to place bets, how they want to experiment, etc. And then cross-collaborate or across the functions that need to work together to make that a reality with like very, very strong sense of clarity in terms of what is it that you want to achieve by these efforts. And it sounds a little trite, and of course, Supriya, don't leaders all do this? And it's a no, not all leaders do this, not as their top priority. A lot of leaders end up having to do a lot of internal comms or politicking and all sorts of things. If you've ever been at any corporate America environment, there's a whole mixed bag of things that you need to do aside from the strategic work. But the burden of strategic work, I think, is going to skyrocket on the leadership teams. And so that might change the way I think the internal dynamics on the leaders, amongst leaders and upper management is going to have to operate, because there's going to be a mixed shift in that sort of like set of leadership jobs to be done. And it's the ones that really, really excel at the strategic thinking, I think, are the ones that are going to survive in tomorrow's universe.
We talked a little offline about the makeup of an organization, how that might change. You talk about judgment being a key skill there that a leader's going to have to flex to select the right strategy for a business. How does somebody develop that skill, particularly if there's this potential hollowing out of middle management that happens, that are these kind of springboard type roles into those leadership positions? What does the organization or a typical organization look like in 10 years? If there are so many more jobs to do, you have a lot of really productive individual contributors and this then layer of leadership above and a hollowed out middle. Do you see that is how the organization will look, first of all? And then I guess, how does one go from individual contributor to leader? How do you make that transition?
I think that a lot of this is going to be that it's not like people are going to go from being very junior to very senior in the same way that we have in the past because they have AI. But there will be a path. I think it's just going to look really different. So, for instance, someone graduating out of college armed with a bunch of AI tools can perform at what would be considered like maybe a mid-level engineer a few years ago, which actually gives them actually a very unique advantage because they can now take on more complex projects. They'll still run into problems. They'll still need to figure out how to design things and innovate in ways that AI is not able to do. And they'll learn from their senior counterparts on how to do these things and get upskilled over time as well in the spaces where AI is not really playing a role yet. Because at the end of the day, if you're using AI, you still need to talk to it. What are you going to ask it? And so those skills will still need to be learned. And then that's, I think, the nature of experience and lived experience is just going to feel a little different because you're working with AI instead of working in isolation. But you still have to experience the things. You'll still learn from those experiences and you'll still rise over time. Certain people will probably enjoy being ICs and becoming more and more senior ICs, and that's fine and that suits them well. As the nature of leadership changes too, that might also just look like a very different job that'll be suited for different types of people as well. So I think that might be some of the difference. Like, for instance, like maybe it may not make sense to have lots of senior engineering leaders, but maybe cross-functional leaders will become more common as a hypothesis. Of course, no one knows what the future is going to look like, but there's all sorts of permutations that could look because engineering, product, all these design, all these disciplines are going to look different a few years from now, given just the way things are evolving. So it'll be interesting what departments there will be and functional lines there will be even 1 or 2 decades from now.
As we come up to the top of the hour here, I just wanted to close out with a reflective question. What's the story that you'd like others to tell about you?
I like that question. I guess I've built a lot of things. I don't know that I want to be known as just the person who just built things. I'd like to be known as the person who believed in what other people could build. And I help them hold the bar, protect trust, open doors for people to do things that they didn't believe they could, and help people in my network, my clients, other leaders, other peers, other confidants in the technology space, particularly with AI and other things, to solve problems that matter and change the world. So I'm hoping that's the legacy I leave with all these businesses that I'm building, that we bring to life things that just felt completely impossible before, and we're able to really create societal impact through the innovation that we're creating through this proverbial AI revolution that we're in right now.
I've no doubt you'll succeed. Supriya, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you.
If you enjoyed this episode, check out notathreat.ai. There you'll find every episode of this podcast complete with show notes and resources to keep learning. You can also sign up for the Not a Threat newsletter, where we condense episodes into the big ideas and share practical tools, frameworks, and insights to help you prepare for an AI-first future.